point. Thank you very much. I now yield for 5 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souder.
Mr. Paulson, had Mr. Geithner signed off on that memo, the terms of the deal?
What would you say?
In other words, you were just about to transition between Treasury Secretaries. Had Mr. Geithner or the incoming administration signed off on the tentative terms?
Mr. Geithner, as you know, was the Treasury Secretary designate, and we wanted there to be a very smooth transition, and so I posted him generally on a number of matters, including that matter, but I never viewed him as a decision maker, and I certainly didn't go to him to sign off on the details of that term sheet.
I have a larger question I want to pursue off of Mr. Lewis, but I want to correct the record on some things that I think have been misstated. As somebody who voted for all three versions of TARP, took incredible political heat in the middle of a tough targeted race, I believe it was the right thing to do, and I would do it again with some additional caveats. But there's been a lot said today about the restrictions that were put on you. In fact, you came, in my opinion, not very tactfully, and told us that you wanted basically a blank sheet of paper with whatever you wanted to do. Initially, they didn't need any Republican votes. Paul Ryan and others in our caucus negotiated some 20 pages of additional things. But the bottom line is that we left there, or the Secretary of Treasury and those responsible can do whatever they think they need to do. Now, we can try to pass blame, we can try to say whatever we want, and in the future we probably need to tie it down more. But at the end of the day, our conference, after hours of internal debate, knew that given the nature of the crisis, we had signed a blank check, for good or bad, that we were going into an election season, we were about to leave town, it was getting highly politicalized, things were changing. I'm not defending the decisions that you made, I'm just saying it's a little bit much for members of Congress to claim that there were all these guidelines in place because we knew full well you had an opt-out clause. Now, that said, clearly you misled us, and we probably wouldn't have had the votes, even though we underneath knew that that was there because we understood it was toxic assets. We didn't believe you were going to take over and the way this was going to evolve. Had we known that, the bill would have never passed or would have put tighter restrictions in. Because what I would say is there was a verbal misleading, even though if anybody read the document, it actually gave you a total blank check. Now, I would also say, I don't understand where people are saying that we weren't in a crisis. Every 48 hours for 3 months, somebody was calling me, telling me a bank was either calling their revolving loan, the mark-to-market was tightening up their assets, so the banks were having their assets drop, people who were never late in their history, people didn't know how to get their payroll dollars, major corporations in this country were having to borrow overseas from third world countries in order to meet their payroll, and that I don't know where it would have gone. I represent a district that is the highest unemployment in the United States, that I have either, Elkhart County has been first in unemployment all the way through, but they're 57% manufacturing. They're 17.6% right now unemployment. We were headed to a lot more than we are now. I'm not necessarily happy with everything that's happening, but it could have been a lot worse. I don't know how catastrophic, but in fact it's relatively stabilized, and I think we can have differences of opinion of how to do it. Now, here's my concern about what I saw in the Lewis thing and where it's evolved. When you intimidated, at the very least, Mr. Lewis, into saying the government's going to do it, somewhere in here we went from toxic assets and loans, and your stated goal to us was we didn't want the government micromanaging and directing. That was the next step, the Lewis process. Then you say when you handed it over, you thought you had a process, but then you don't really know what happened after that. Since then, we now have common stock in banks. We're telling them on bonuses. We're micromanaging. Tomorrow, we have a proposal, now that we've taken over stock in GM, to tell GM that they can't close dealerships. Now, this is the problem when government starts to take over. If you were Treasury Secretary now, where would you have started to draw the line here? You started to walk into it with Mr. Lewis when you realized that could kind of scrambled. Would you have moved to common stock? Do you believe this has gone too far? What lessons can we learn from what we've seen here? Because right now, the government is in so deep that getting out is going to be very difficult, and we're micromanaging, and Congress is going to start to tell people what kind of tie they can buy if we're not careful?
To me, that's the right question. And one of the things that was most difficult for me is I came to the job believing totally, and I still do, in markets and free enterprise and not wanting to see government overly involved. And so I was forced to make some decisions which were very objectionable, but they were better than the alternative. And I thought the decisions we made were going to ultimately help to preserve the markets. So I think the key question is not only how do you get into these programs, but what's the right exit strategy? What is the right exit strategy? When is the system stable? And when do we get out? And I don't think that it is appropriate for me, as a former Secretary of Treasury, 5 months out of the job, to be, and not any closer to it than I am now, to be saying more than that, other than because I think everyone here understands that that government has been forced to do things. I think forced to do things by not only a unprecedented crisis, but forced to do things because we didn't have the tools we needed. There were not wind-down authorities. There was nothing to deal with the failure of a large non-banking institution other than the bankruptcy process. There was, and we had a really outdated regulatory system.
It's fair to say that even under great pressure, you didn't take common stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a reason.
Yeah, I did not under.
Let me, the gentleman's time has expired, and let me just do a little housekeeping here. We have 7 votes on the floor, so the committee will recess until 1:30. We'll return back at 1:30. Yeah.